Hi, HR Nation. Welcome to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest. We're joined by David Swanagon, who's the head of HR and analytics for technical services at Aramco. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
My journey, I definitely have a lot of wanderlust for international travel and different assignments. So ironically, I actually started my career in Las Vegas, and it sounds a little bit weird to go from Las Vegas into Saudi, but it does make some sense. So back in, early 2000s, the economy in the US was doing really well. And I worked for a company called Las Vegas Sands, and they're the owner of the Venetian and Palazzo. And, my job was really the head of the performance management function. And we opened the Palazzo Las Vegas, the Hotel Bethlehem in Pennsylvania, as well as the Marina Bay Sands in Venetian Macau in Asia. And it was really a cool experience. It's basically from the construction all the way to the hiring of staff and then into operations. What's interesting about the hotel business is that it has very thin profit margins. And so you have to run from an efficiency standpoint. And then obviously guest service and the employee experience is, fundamental. From there, I actually followed my boss across the street and ended up opening the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. So that hotel is located next to the Bellagio and the beautiful fountains. It's right next door.
We see it in the movies all the time.
Yeah, you see it in the movies all the time. And it's funny because you watch a lot of these shows on HBO and Showtime and you see them, showcase the Cosmopolitan. You remember what it looked like when it was just a construction zone. But at the time, it was interesting. I ended up working with Deutsche Bank and the property was actually defaulted as part of the US recession.
Really?
I mean, back in 2009, 2010, Las Vegas was really struggling.
Because that was literally, the recession was 2008, right? So that's like...
Yeah, it was 2008. And then trying to recover, obviously we're still coming to Vegas, but they weren't spending the same amount of money.
Yeah, I bet.
Trying to convince a bunch of very conservative German bankers to finish the $1 billion in construction.
Yeah,
it was a challenging effort, but what was exciting about it is literally within a year and a half, we finished the remaining $1 billion in construction, hired 5,000 people, and we ended up launching one of the most successful hotel brands. Even today, Cosmo is very successful. What was challenging about that environment was really we had to build a brand from scratch and a CRM from scratch, so there was no corporate function. Figuring out how to attract customers and how to create an employee value proposition when there's nothing to work from. Because you clearly couldn't use Deutsche Bank. I mean, German banker, Las Vegas doesn't really
doesn't
matter.
go together, yeah.
Yeah. So we built that from scratch, and then we ended up, staying there until the property was sold. From there, at the time, there really wasn't any companies building new hotels, just from the economic perspective. So I got this opportunity to come to Saudi Arabia and work for the world's largest oil company. I literally had no clue what was it about. Never actually came here sight unseen.
So you took the role without even...
Yeah, I took the role. I mean, it's funny because they fly you to Houston and they have really fancy,
I bet they go all out.
They give you first class tickets. Everything is just first class. You never see the society until you get there. And it's funny because it's part of the adventure, and I think you just have to commit yourself to the work. I think what excited me at the time was they really were trying to transform the kingdom. They had made the decision to wean themselves off of oil, but there was a lot of human capital challenges associated with that because you had multi-generational people having worked at the same company, grandfathers, fathers, and so forth. And a lot of the policies were driven from a pure energy perspective and not from a performance perspective, efficiencies or anything. We were hired to come in and kind of create an HR business partner function, add a data science function, and really start to enhance the insights and people analytics of the business.
So when you joined and you jumped in, obviously it's a brand new team, brand new function. Where do you start? Because a lot of people that are starting people analytics functions, that's one of the biggest challenges, right?
Yeah,
There's almost too many things to choose from. Obviously, you have to prioritize what's going to make the most impact on the business. So how did you go about doing that?
I can tell you what we should have done, because what we did, really didn't work at first. But in retrospect, having learned through this process, you have to start with understanding who your key stakeholders are, and also what their data fluency is, and how they make decisions. Because part of the challenge with digitalization is everyone talks about the positives of, you're using both structured and unstructured data, the power of Tableau, R, Python, all that wonderful stuff. But when you start showing very sophisticated data models to executives, it forces them to make decisions that they may not be ready to make. Most of the time before the introduction of data science, it was very broad strokes. It was based on either their personal experience or, causal factors that you could...
Gut feeling.
Yeah, gut feeling. And, or some very basic Excel charts that say, here's the year-over-year change or whatever. It's interesting because it's actually fairly easy to manage that way, because you feel a comfort. You say, if I do X, then Y will happen, and this will drive my KPI results. But once you start introducing these very sophisticated, regressions, correlations, so forth, it actually says that human beings are pretty complicated, and hiring the right person is harder than it sounds, and developing them so that they are in the right job at the right time is fairly complex. And it requires executives sometimes making decisions that go against their intuition. And so I think, what I would tell somebody who's starting a data science function is really get a sense of the data fluency of your executives.
Yeah.
Understand who the key champion of this is and how far she or he is willing to defend you. And introduce it incrementally in stages, because if you show something very advanced, even if the data is correct, if it highlights all of these inefficiencies, you're going to lose a lot of support. So it's much better to run those models in the background and then figure out how to slowly introduce change in an incremental fashion. It's a lesson that we learned because you want to just show them everything. You want to show the cool little tool, but you have to teach people how to drive this car. Otherwise, they'll crash it.
Yeah. And you said, didn't you, beforehand when we were speaking, that you almost had to scale it completely back?
Yeah.
Right? And now you're having to start from the beginning and build slowly but surely, right? One step at a time, because it was almost too overwhelming. And it's funny because you think the more data and insights you have, that's amazing. But actually, in your case, it kind of almost backfired because it was too much for them as well. So you and the team were probably like, we're doing such a great job. Here it is. And the leaders are not ready for that as well. So it's a very interesting insight.
It highlights redundancy and effort. And it also shows that leadership is very situational and it's dependent upon context, even on external assessments. I mean, whether you use Korn Ferry or Aon Hewitt or whatever it is, they come up with these competency models that say these behaviors make a good leader. It's kind of universal. As long as this person has these behaviors, they're a good leader. But when you apply it to certain contexts, like someone leading a plant in the field versus leading a cybersecurity team, the required behaviors and the required leadership traits totally different. Mm-hmm. Realize that one person would be perfect to run a plant, one person would be perfect to run a cyber operation, but both wouldn't be interchangeable. If you make that decision and you show through data that's the case, it requires the company to completely change how it does high potential development, for example. Mm-hmm.
Before we jump into that in more detail, we're really excited to jump into that. Just to take a step back 1 second, you said before you were talking about data wars in the business.
Yes.
Can you elaborate more on that, and then we'll jump into more of the development piece that we're talking about?
So, and these are it's pretty funny. This is the drawback. It's a benefit, but it's a drawback of working with incredibly smart people. So at Aramco, everyone is either an engineer or a scientist in some very technical domain. Mm-hmm. The anchor for them is statistics and mathematics. So it's really unique. Most companies don't have
Yes, this is why I wanted to highlight this.
Yeah. So, and I think for us, we're super advanced on the data analytics function, especially on the production operations side, and we're starting to do that in the HR side. But what ends up happening is if if you use, for example, ggplot and R, and you do some kind of regression that tells us X, Y, and Z behaviors result in this retention percentage. And if you do something else, it's causing people to leave their jobs. We might do some kind of analysis like that. Well, if an executive reads that and doesn't feel it reflects on his or her organization correctly, then he'll get all his data scientists design a separate regression study that's also correct. I mean, like if you look at the p-values of both analyses, they're both right. It's just how you look at it, and they're both very complex. So you should see, like, the senior executives will sit in a meeting looking at very sophisticated data models that say the exact opposite thing on the same issue. And I think the nuance in being a leader of analytics is you have to understand what they're ready to hear and understand the momentum of change. And if you can get a pulse of the organization and say, okay, this topic, pretty much everyone's ready to change on, then you can coalesce around a data model everyone agrees to. If you don't have that sense of what are the topics they are ready for or not ready for, then you have these quote unquote data wars where it is pretty funny, because if two people are talented, it's like the Jedi versus the Sith. It's just it's a major data battle, and it never goes well.
Yeah, and I just love that story because I've heard it a few times, not many times, but in different organizations, and it's something that's important for people to watch out because not everyone's ready to hear it, like you said. How do you go? How did you go, and how do you go about making sure that you can focus on those right areas that people are ready to hear? What does that look like?
Well, and I think this is where the nuance comes in, is you have to have a really strong idea of the corporate strategy. What's listed in the PowerPoint of a company is really just the starting point. So when you look at an organization's overall strategy and their corporate objectives, that's great. That's a good way to start. But then you have to take the extra step and really build those relationships with the senior executives and understand, what's important to them, and how are they translating that corporate document into day-to-day operations. And usually what happens is there's probably 2 or 3 initiatives that executive cares about. Yeah. And everything else is like, yes, we need to do it. It's important, but these are my things that I care about, that I'm willing to fight for in a meeting or with the board. And once you get a sense of that, then you're like, okay, how does our data set, how can it be used to facilitate or mechanize change in this area? Mm-hmm. What's exciting is, now Aramco has so much money that they can invest in.
They obviously went public recently, right? It's the most valuable company in the world. Is that?
Yeah, right? Most valuable company in the world, and very bright, smart people. I mean, the level of intelligence, and it's really impressive. And I think what's interesting though is you have really strong data tools, because we don't just use structured data, we use unstructured data, and we pull in macro stuff from, geopolitics, economy, so forth. It gives us a sense of how we're doing. But what you really need to understand is, okay, we have all of these factors. Now, how does this drive or relate to what that executive cares about? And if you can show them data that doesn't just confirm what they want, but challenges them and says, I know this is what you care about, but here are the downsides, here's the risk factors, and here are the things we can do, then you really start to get some momentum behind it. Yeah. But people who just do the traditional, all right, we're going to build our database, we're going to build our data marts, we're going to create these models and these dashboards, and we're just going to give them the data, and whatever it says, it says. It's destined to fail.
Yeah.
Because exactly. You're beings, man. And if you start showing metrics that they're not ready to see or don't reflect exactly the strategy as it's being executed, you're just going to have people resist and rebel. And that kind of stuff.
And it's good, it's great that you shared that. Obviously, that you've made that mistake. And I thought, honestly, most people, nearly every people analytics lead that I spoke to have that story, their journey where they've done that. And that's why I love hearing it from you again. These constant themes that I love coming up on the show, and that is one of them that I keep saying. But the data wars, not so much, only in particular organizations, but making sure that the execs are ready to see it and more importantly, aligning it with their goals. and their strategy, it's going to be, you're going to be very successful if you can do that correctly. And it's not
Well,
always about doing it, because also it's also good to, maybe prove or disprove their theories as well to help them make decisions. It's not always going to be just as positive in line with their goals.
Well, and what's interesting too is I thought that when we introduced data, it would make meetings more efficient and it would make meetings easier to facilitate.
You'd think that.
Yeah, it actually requires a lot more pre-work and preparing executives so they go into the meeting understanding already what the data says. Because the richness of the conversation, this is probably the other thing we learned, is that if you don't prep them in advance, you spend the whole meeting
explaining it.
Yeah, like this is what this means, and this is, this is.
How do you do that then? How do you prep them in advance?
So, and this is where, like, when we've hired our business partners, we've tried to hire people that are more data scientists with personalities.
I completely get what you're saying.
Yeah,
because they need to be able to convey it in a language that the leader in the business can understand, not in a very high, technical terms. You need to just
yeah. And we thought, everybody, there's gaps with everyone. So if you can, it would probably be easier to develop someone's soft skills versus technical skills around
100%.
Yeah. So we emphasize more of the hard technical skills in our business partners, and then we try to build their soft skills, slowly over time. What that does is this allows us to create these models. The business partner works with their executive to understand and kind of calibrate the data analysis and prepare the talking points and so forth. And then when we're in the meeting, they end up actually having a rich discussion about the pros and cons versus arguing over, is it accurate, is it not accurate? But again, you learn that over time, because at first you just throw it out there and you spend the whole meeting explaining something. And if one executive doesn't agree, it's over. So this consensus building takes a really strong HR business partner to get them to not only understand the data, but to engage with it and to show the executive that if you do these things, it'll improve this area. Mm-hmm. And it helps them kind of highlight their successes and also what their strategy will be moving forward.
Yeah. Just for everyone listening as well, give us a quick overview of the structure of the people analytics team. What does that look like?
It's still in development phase, so HR is just a small piece of a much broader analytics function for the company. So we have a chief digital officer that basically runs analytics for the entire organization. And then we also have statisticians and analytics that are specific to the upstream, downstream space.
Yeah.
For HR, the journey we're on is, traditionally we were just focusing on the HRIS kind of SQL database. Here is where someone went to school. Here's their GPA. Very boring, structured data perspective. Mm-hmm. And what we've tried to do is take all of these other systems and all of these other data points, including wearables, for example, and get a bunch of unstructured data to be collected and combined with our structured piece. Mm-hmm. And then what we do is through our business partner model, and then we have some data scientists that do the programming piece. We create kind of these model frameworks that the business partners can then tailor for their individual executives. Because, for example, if we have our executive of supply chain, that individual is going to care about very specific things related to the logistical operations and the warehousing operations. Whereas if you're talking to, the head of engineering, this person is more concerned about the environmental impacts and flaring intensity and things like that, and the inspection quality of our plants. So we have to create these models that are anchored correctly from a programming perspective, but allow the business partner to tweak, change, and develop while still having all the totals balanced back to some kind of number. So for us, our analytics team is kind of a centralized function, but then we have business partners reporting to each executive that can then tweak the models.
Fantastic. And let's jump into one of those models then, because you've kind of reinvented the 9-box structure.
Yeah.
And I love that story. And just so everyone listened as well, I was speaking with David. This was supposed to be a call where we just said hello to each other, right? And we was having so much fun. I was like, let's just hit record, David, and make this happen. So I just wanted to let everyone know that, because sometimes it needs to just hit that record button and keep things authentic and let it flow. And that's one thing I love about the show. So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love talking about HR, and and like I said, I mean, it's nice when I say it's the proverbial I. It really means,
yeah.
You know, we work with so many talented people here, and you know, I have nothing but positive things to say about Aramco. But from the 9-box, so this is the result of working with a bunch of brainiacs and scientists. We really took the 9-box to a completely data-driven perspective. So most organizations, what they do is they calibrate their talent by just subjectively putting their staff into different boxes.
Yep.
And through calibration meetings, it kind of coalesces around, we think this person's in this area. And then they create, you know, kind of development plans based on that calibration. For us, it's a completely data-driven approach. And we actually have a high potential KPI that we use that's tied to the data-driven 9-box. So for example, if you look at every single location within the 9-box, we have criteria that can be fully automated. So we look at things like someone's promotion velocity, the leadership assessments, and that's usually from external providers such as Korn Ferry or Aon, 360 engagement surveys, KPI scorecard results, job assignment history, academics. So all of the factors that we know drive performance, we actually plot within the 9-box based on two things. So we do external benchmarks of leaders that have become executives within the oil and gas space, and what was their academics, their job assignment history, you know, what distinguished them. And then we also do an internal benchmark of our current executives. And it tells us when they were 27 or 28, here's the training they had, here's the assignments they had, and here's their assessment scores. And it kind of gives us a profile, both externally and internally. What does a box 1 person look like, you know, top right? And what does someone in box 9, bottom left, look like? So from that perspective, we take all those data points, and then we populate the 9-box. We pre-populate it based on all of the automated data in the system for our employees. And then when the executives nominate someone for the high potential list, we already know which box they're going to be in. So the executive doesn't select the location of the box, they just select the person. And then once someone is, you know, chosen, okay, this is a high potential, if they're a box 5 or in the middle, for example, we already have an automated development plan for them because we know exactly what someone in box 5 should do in terms of their courses, their coaching, their assessments, and their assignments. So what this process has done for us is it not only helps us with our talent selection, but it actually completely automates the development planning process. And then it allows the executives to spend more time on gap analysis stuff. And if they have a disagreement on a particular person, then we can kind of zero in on what is it about this person that the data is not reflecting correctly. And then the executives can escalate it and give them an assignment or whatever. But yeah, it's this data-driven 9-box. It's really helped focus leaders on the decisions that matter. And then it connects our succession planning, our HP process, and our promotion and performance management process all together in a single KPI.
You mentioned as well when we first spoke about this that there were some hidden insights that you didn't expect that arise that you're now using more within the HR team that you didn't plan this for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So speaking specifically about the data-driven 9-box is that part of it, we also calculate an agreement index between the executives and the 9-box. So if an executive feels someone is box 1, but the data says they're in box 5, that disagreement is flagged. And then what we do is we analyze that employee and we start to realize that, wow, we either didn't give the person an assignment correctly when they were first starting out, or this person wasn't assigned a mentor the right way, or they're missing very clear courses that we didn't know. And why this is so powerful is that if we rely just on the subjective 9-box.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, what it does is it always paints the employee in the most favorable light because this person is nominating them. So if you're never going to really expose the deficiencies in the HR program that's developing them, because we only focus on the people the executives like, and they all seem to coalesce in the top right quadrant. Because when you think about it, no executives, yes, this person's a high potential, but they're box 9, they're at the bottom left. They're not good, but there's high potential. But the data does show that. And then when it exposes that, it usually says it's not the executive's fault. It's that HR, for whatever reason, has missed key development experiences for that person. And then we spend the next year trying to accelerate that. And then the goal is to not so much change the people in the box, but it's to slowly over time move them to the top right quadrant through our HR activities.
When did you roll this out, and what's been the feedback from the executives so far? Because I'm sure it was a big change for them.
This was one of our first data wars.
I love it. It's like a saga.
Yeah, it is. It's like, I'm telling you, it's the Jedi versus the Sith, but with data. So we rolled this out 3 years ago, and it admittedly, it didn't really go well because executives are like, the data is not going to tell me about my employees. My employees, I know better. I interact with these people. This person is in the top right. This person's not a box 9. Your data is wrong. We ended up through calibration and iteration. And like what I was saying before is understanding what are the executives trying to do. And when they started to realize that we're not using the 9 box as a selection tool, we're not using it to tell them no, we're using it to identify gaps in our development process. Then they stopped getting a little worried about it, and they went, yeah, why haven't you done the 360 on him? That's your fault, not mine. Why haven't you sent them to these courses? And when they started to see that this actually helps facilitate the development, the resistance went away. And now they use it we have it as part of our performance dialogue. Every single organization has a high potential quality KPI, and they're responsible for meeting targets and progressing their HPs along the 9 box, through specific development actions.
Love it. Would you say that that's the thing that you're most proud of?
I'll be honest with you. I think the thing I'm most proud of happened 2 months ago. Obviously, anything in the news, people recognize about Saudi Aramco, having the production go offline, with missile attacks.
Oh yeah, tell everyone about that. Yeah, I can't believe we missed that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everything is in the news. You can read about it, but Abcake. It was funny. I think I'm the only HR professional that's lived on the Las Vegas Strip and lived in the camp that was attacked by missiles.
Yeah, there's not many of those CVs going around.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting career experiences. But so when I first came to Aramco, I actually lived in Abcake before transferring to Dhahran.
Explain to people that don't know what that is, that area.
Yeah. So
very important,
Abcake,
obviously.
Abcake is the largest oil producing plant in the world.
Exactly. I just wanted to make sure you put that out there for everyone who didn't know that.
Yeah, and it literally impacts global oil supply, global oil prices, and it's just one of probably the most important plants in the entire world. And when it was attacked and shut down, it wasn't just impacting the GDP of the kingdom and the society. It was a global major macro event that completely changed energy demand for China, energy demand for India. It impacted the United States. Even though the U.S. is more energy independent, it still impacted gas prices, oil prices. So the thing I'm most proud of, and again, this wasn't me accomplishing it, but it was working with our colleagues, is that our business line, the engineers and scientists, were principally responsible for diagnosing the issue, dealing with the technical challenges, and bringing the plant back online in a very quick time. And watching these individuals work 7 days a week, hardly with any sleep. And these young engineers, I mean, there were senior people involved, but you would be surprised. These were young mechanical engineers, process engineers, environmental specialists doing an amazing job. And I was laughing with our colleagues. It's probably the first time I've seen senior executives see the value of HR directly on the business, because these engineers were developed by our HR programs. Mm-hmm. So going through our engineering trainings programs, our engineering courses, working with the mentors we've assigned them and learning from these senior engineers, these individuals were able to, wake up one day, and when they were called to do something, very important to the entire society of the kingdom, they delivered.
Yeah.
It's amazing to watch.
And if people don't know the story, literally got hit by a missile, right? Like missile attack on the plant, and they kept rebuild it.
And then 2 months later, we IPO'd. So I was,
and then exactly. And then 2 months later, you IPO'd, and now the most valuable company in the world. It's like a movie plot.
Yeah. It's like, two career-defining experiences, but they happened in the fourth quarter. So
yeah. Wow. What a year you guys have had.
It's been amazing. And I think, finally, Saudi Aramco is getting the due it deserves on a global basis, because, the things they're trying to accomplish, not just from an energy perspective, but from building, the society, and also making Saudi Arabia, one of the top 10 economies in the world. It's really special to watch. I mean, nothing's perfect. Just like any other business, you have challenges and you have things you want to, improve on. But the company moves a lot faster than people can imagine, and the changes that they're experiencing, it's a sight to see.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you. Excited for the team. Before we wrap up, what's next on the horizon? Where for you? I'm sure you have big ambitions. What's next for you and the team? What are you working on?
Our big plan is really preparing us for the future of jobs framework. So obviously we want to build our diversity and inclusiveness, and females in the workforce, but we also want to really develop a strong, automation, digitalization footprint that allows Aramco to solve problems before they become problems. So a good example is a lot of people look at attrition after it's happened, and then they try to analyze attrition and say, okay, why did these people leave the company? A lot of the metrics we're creating are like attrition at risk. So we'll do all these regression studies, and it'll tell us, based on everything we know, these 10 people are at risk of resigning, even though they haven't. And then we try to do intervention meetings beforehand, even though we had no indication from the employee that they're thinking of resigning. And it's just the analytics have told us, because of this person's talent, their skill set, what we see in the market, etc., it's worth us having a conversation with them. I think it's introducing more of those sophisticated models.
One step at a time.
One step at a time. And like I said, I think this company is unique because of the level of mathematical skill. I don't know if it's as successful at other organizations. You apply it based on the workforce. Yeah. But here they just love stats. So we do I think we overdo it sometimes, but it's very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, you think about it, right? When we speak to companies out there, the skill set that exists in your business is probably one of the most high demand skills in organizations, right? So you're very lucky in that sense, but also leads to a lot of data wars. So I'm gonna have to make like a thumbnail for this episode with, like a Star Wars theme,
Exactly.
I'm gonna have to make it happen now. I'm thinking, title for the episode, Data Wars. We're gonna have to come up with something good for this. But before we wrap up, we're just gonna jump into our quick fire round. So I'm gonna ask you 5 questions, and you have 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
Okay, jeez. All right.
What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a people analytics leader?
I think it was my own ego. You have to really focus on continuous learning and understand that every programming language has value and every database has value. And the minute you think you have the skills required, you're actually no longer useful. So
Love it. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I think you have to find a champion and understand what that person wants. And if you can help them, they'll help you.
What's one book you'd recommend to our audience, and why?
Well, I actually like that book, Extreme Ownership. It's by a Navy SEAL, and it really talks about no matter whether you're successful or your team fails, it falls on the leader. And if you can cultivate that I am accountable for everything that happens, that's what develops a strong team culture and respect among the peers.
Fantastic. Could you share some internet resources that you use to either keep up to date with current events or use for your own personal development?
Yeah. So, I mean, the nice thing is the University of YouTube really has every single thing.
I'm gonna steal that from you now because I say it to everyone else. Yeah,
it is ridiculous. Like I learned how to fix a water heater yesterday. Did an R programming session, and then I watched a politics show, all on the University of YouTube.
Yeah, and it's free. Free university.
Free. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then last question: what's one thing that you're most excited about today?
I'm most excited about the future, actually, is that I wake up and it's challenging. The demographic and the geography of where I work is incredibly challenging. And I think HR is starting to matter in companies, probably for the first time. Mm-hmm. It's great to have a job people respect.
Yeah, no, you couldn't be in a more excited space. Any sort of people analytics lead, or actually any HR lead in general that I speak to, now is the time. It's like the HR people analytics reckoning this is happening in organizations, right?
Exactly.
You've seen every function go through it. You know, you've seen you've seen sales, you've seen operations, supply chain. That's like this emergence of people analytics and HR going through that digital transformation. We've seen every other function go through it, the digital transformation. Yeah. Now it's HR's turn as well. So very excited for you, very excited for the team. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you, and I'm excited to stay connected and follow your experience. Before we wrap up,
absolutely, it was a blast. I loved our conversation.
I appreciate it. Before we wrap up, with this sort of one parting piece of advice you give to other people analytics leaders or HR leaders out there, what would that be? And also, if anyone wants to connect with you, where's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. And I think, start with R. I think R Studio is the best way to understand how to use data science and data analytics, and then move into the Hadoop and all the wonderful database structures and things. But if there's one thing you can learn, it's R programming.
Okay, I'm going to write that down because I don't even know. I've never heard of that myself.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Well, look, I'll let you go. And it's your weekend right now, right? You're actually it's Friday, weekend, but you're on the weekend. You're on the weekend as well. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. All right?
Okay. Hey, thanks so much.
No problem.